Welcome to Crunching Data, where we go behind the scenes with the data leaders who keep it all flowing. We're talking real stories, real challenges, and the future of data from the people building it. This is Crunching Data, a podcast brought to you by Mattia, the unified data ops platform. Let's get into today's episode.
Hey everyone, this is Benjamin Siegel, the co-founder CEO of Mattia, here with Crunching Data, a podcast brought to you by Mattia. I'm very excited to have with me Cathy Tanimura from Summit Partners. I will let her get into her background in a bit more. Cathy, it's great having you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Benjamin.
Thank you so much. How did your journey into data begin, and what drew you into it originally?
Yeah, my journey into data was kind of accidental. I was working at a company called StubHub. It was a very small startup back in the day. I was hired as a partnership manager, so I was managing partnerships with sports teams, media outlets, celebrities, where we would auction front row tickets to their concerts. And I also had some background working with Excel, so did a number of projects that involved data munching, mostly with Excel. My boss at the time had built a data warehouse using Access on his laptop. And at one point he went on vacation and he said, look, can you just babysit this for me? Here's how you run it. Here's how you refresh the Excel pivot tables. And I never gave it back. I sort of fell in love with the idea of having more power to analyze data. And then around that time, would tend to hear my marketing friends getting yelled at by the CEO because I couldn't tell him how much ticket sales they were driving with the marketing dollars that they were spending. And this would go on, week after week. And eventually I said, maybe I can help you out. And they got different data from, we had a sort of how did you hear about us button. They got data from radio stations they advertised on, affiliate networks, and a little search engine called Google at the time. And they had these different spreadsheets they'd get, and they just sort of didn't know how to put a unified picture together. And so I said, well, let me take a look at this. I think I can help you. I have this database thing. And away we went. Put together a kind of original first touch attribution model before I knew that was even a thing. And, eventually moved that Access database into a more powerful Oracle database and kind of learned data warehouses and data movement, and away I went.
It's pretty crazy to hear two things. The first one is that Google was small once upon a time. And then the second is, you being at StubHub, which, it's pretty phenomenal company today. And I bought at least once, I think, tickets from StubHub in my life time. I think more than once, but at least once. And it's really crazy to know that, I didn't know it's a 20-year plus company. So it's pretty interesting to see that. And how you were there when Access was used, well, in the 70s or 80s. It's basically the same. It's just it's a way higher scale, but it's the same ideas behind the thing. So it's pretty crazy to hear that from you. It seems like your path is not, the linear path. What are some pivotal turns? For sure, one of them is your boss at the time or friend going to a vacation and giving you the laptop or babysitting the project. But can you share a bit some more about pivotal moments? And I know you've been to some more phenomenal companies, in your path, if it's Zynga or Okta or Strava. And so would love to hear more about the pivotal moments and things that actually made it or break it. Because I think a lot of people, even though we have AI, etc. today, a lot of people today are thinking of what can make a big difference or a dent in my career or in the way I'm doing things.
So after I was at StubHub for a while, they got bought by eBay, and I decided to move on, and I actually got an MBA, which is not terribly common in the data field, but took a couple of years and got an MBA. Thought I would actually change careers because at the time, data wasn't really a career. It was sort of a useful thing, but there wasn't a lot of examples of people who had, become more senior and built that kind of a career path. So did that. I graduated during the global financial crisis, which was a interesting time to be on the job market. Again, looking for, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I stumbled upon a job at Zynga, which was another data job. I thought, I should do some interviews and look for a job. Ended up going in and talking with them. And interestingly, I wasn't particularly a gamer. But they were doing some really interesting things with what we ended up calling big data, where they were instrumenting different game actions and keeping track of who was playing and what they were doing in the games. So there were some pretty interesting problems. Had built out some infrastructure, but we're starting up the analytics team to kind of take that data and help the games improve, grow, make more money, that sort of thing. So I ended up saying, yeah, like this, seems like a good team, seems like a good group of people, seems like some interesting problems. Went in and worked on a lot of the early sort of analysis, cohort analysis, growth metrics that we call them out today. I worked on FarmVille, if anybody remembers, the cute little cows that showed up in the Facebook feed, and then nothing else showed up in the Facebook feed.
It's also when Facebook was a small thing, right? Like Facebook also grew quite a
little
lot.
Company called Facebook. Yeah. And so some of the viral analytics of, how do we track people inviting their friend via the cow, and, are pink cows better than brown cows? It turns out that pink cows were very popular. And spent some time there working in the games, and then ended up kind of managing and leading teams of analysts working on the games, and eventually led the whole group while I was there. So that was, I think, pretty pivotal, where I sort of might have gone in a different direction, but it just turned out that data was exploding, and I've essentially never looked back. I've stayed in the data world ever since.
Were you good at math from kind of like young age, or like what would you, because at the end there is some, to data there are two interesting things, I think. One is, understanding and being able to find patterns within, few points or different data points. And the second is being able to communicate that. There are some people that are phenomenally technically at understanding the patterns or building them or technically building them. There are amazing people that are really good at storytelling of data. There are not many that can do both. So I feel like you have experience in both cases. So I'm wondering if, you got drawn into data, or not into data, starting with Access, going to MBA, then coming back to data, maybe because of the financial industry, crisis. But I'm wondering if this is something you always had in you, right? Like the math or the numbers and the dots or the data and the points.
Yeah. So was I good at math? I was always pretty good at math. I always enjoyed my math classes. I think I also enjoyed other classes as well. So when I went to college, I started as an engineer. So I thought, I like math and this is a good career path. But then I found almost the amount of sort of math and science requirements was so much that there was very little time to take art classes or English classes or history or, sort of other subjects. So I ended up switching out and becoming an economics major, which is, I think, an interesting mixture of math and modeling, and then also narrative of why does this explain the world. And so, I guess what maybe has made my path a little bit unique, or sort of where I fit in this world, is that I love the math and the technical bits, but I also like what does this mean? Why does this matter? Where should we apply this? And trying to knit all of those things together. And I think in data, there's a lot of space for a lot of different mindsets. And there are definitely parts where you need people who really love to go deep on the math and the technology and master that. And it's fine if those people don't love talking to salespeople about why the numbers matter. And then you also need people who really understand what does this mean about this customer? Why should I care? How can I do something with it? I've always kind of played sort of somewhere in the middle, which for me has been, a passion sort of interest area for me. But I do think there's, interestingly, a lot of different adjacent roles that kind of fit under the data umbrella.
I agree. We cannot agree with you more. You've been through very interesting companies. If it's, again, StubHub and Zynga and Okta and Strava, and you're pretty humble, but I think you've been through a lot of interesting transformations in times and system and technology, et cetera, et cetera. Today, you are at Summit Partners, which is, I guess, different, but I'm wondering if you can share a bit on your role today and what you're doing,
I've been at Summit Partners for about 5 years. It's a growth equity investment firm, so a little bit later stage than VC, although a lot of similarities. I kind of wear 3 hats. One of them is working on an internal intelligence platform that we've developed. So we ingest a lot of data from different data sources about companies and people and deals that are happening in the world to inform our sort of investing and deal sourcing. I do a lot of work during diligence, working with the deal teams to assess kind of tech and data maturity of potential investments, as well as helping them wrangle larger data files that we get as part of the process to try to understand the health of the business, customers, customer growth, that sort of thing. And then I spend time working with portfolio companies post-investment on anything they need in the data world. So tools and technology, team development, data strategy, mentorship, sometimes roll up my sleeves and get my hands on some of their data and help them out when they maybe don't have quite enough capacity. So I get to see across the investment life cycle and a lot of different companies. So I think it's been interesting switching gears into a different sort of role. What I love is that I still get to do data day in and day out. I get to spend some of my time coding. I get to spend a lot of time talking about data. I get to help people on their journey and maybe avoid some of the cuts and scrapes that I have experienced and help them navigate how to pick good tools, navigate the personalities, position people to really be successful in the roles, and obviously help our companies grow and be successful as well.
That's super interesting. I bet it's even became more interesting in the past few years with AI. But before AI, there was big data, and before that, there was no cloud, and then cloud, and on-prem. Like there are every 4 or 5 years, I feel like there was something big in data, just different names of things. But I bet it was interesting in the past few years supporting the companies from an AI standpoint. I saw you wrote a book. Can you share a bit about the book and what is the topic or what's the book about? Really, really interesting. I know.
Yeah.
I don't know how hard it is to write a book. I never tried to write a book, but just wondering how this came along.
So I wrote a book called SQL for Data Analysis. It's an O'Reilly title. While we were locked down during the pandemic, in addition to watching Netflix, I wrote about my favorite topic, which is SQL and data analysis. It was definitely an interesting process. It was sort of a bucket list item that I always wanted to write a book and didn't quite know what to do. What to write about. O'Reilly actually approached me. I was supposed to speak at one of their conferences. They got canceled because COVID came along and said, we're looking for someone to write a title about SQL and analytics. Looks like you have a good background. What do you think? And so I have to say it was really helpful to have the editors and folks there walk me through the process and obviously do the editing and arranging and organize the publishing and, find me an animal for the cover, and all I had to do was sit down and write and a lot of editing. It took about 1.5 years to go through the whole process. It was, I think the part that I sort of most enjoyed and the part that I feel most proud of is I went in thinking, I want to write the book that I wish existed when I was coming up in data. Because I looked and I couldn't find it, and so again, some of the experience and sort of approaches and ways of thinking about things, I tried to put all of that in so that other folks can, learn from that and, honestly start on a higher plane and hopefully find even more interesting, exciting things to do with data. So it's nice to have it on my bookshelf. Not sure that I have the free time again to write more. But it's definitely something I'm glad I did.
Looking back at your time, I feel like I need to read the book. So I'm going to get one copy of the book and going to read it. But looking back, what are some of skills or experiences that you would say, are non-traditional data kind of like work that influence the majority of your success? I looked a bit at your LinkedIn before, but you spoke in multiple conferences. You clearly led some of the most phenomenal teams out there. And I'm sure you have today a vast network with people that you worked with that most likely expanded into multiple other companies from your experience. So I'm wondering what other things that you think, are key to your success or influence your success?
Yeah, I think some of the keys to success have been really trying to put myself in other people's shoes and think about what do they need in order to do their job better. I often go to people and, I know how to do data and they know how to do marketing or sales or engineering or any number of things that, at this point I know a decent amount about, but that's not my job, that's their job. And I think I've been able to sit down with people and say, What do you do? What do you have challenges with? What would help you do those things better? If you've come and asked me for data, let's talk about, like, if you have this data, what do you do differently? And figure out, is this the right data? Is this the right format? How should we get it to you? Where should it fit into your process? That sort of thing. And I think that, humanity and building trust and just having genuine empathy for, you're an expert at something else. And it's not that, data is complex and it's technical, but ultimately it's about, doing whatever it is you need to do in a better way. You need to run a company. You need to sell to customers. You need to help customers solve their problems. You need to, fix your car, whatever it is. There's some information that needs to flow around. And so that has, I think, helped just build relationships with people and trust. Also, just being open-minded to like lots of different parts of the organization and lots of different roles. I've always been a sort of generalist specialist where I like talking to everybody across the whole company, and I like sort of being in the middle. Even the lawyers, they come and, we need to worry about GDPR now. It's like, okay, well, like, let's talk about what you're concerned about. Let's talk about what I'm concerned about, and what do you do all day? We don't tend to overlap a whole lot except for, certain topics. And that's something I think I've brought and tried to encourage other people to do, is just sit with people, walk a mile in their shoes, see if you can listen in on calls to understand how they operate. And then I guess, maybe another key to success has been to just help everybody. And I guess I've been in the business long enough that, I always thought, there can be a tendency to, only focus on the CEO or only focus on the VP of this or that. But really, the people that were the entry-level people when I started now are running companies and are, C-suite folks at other companies. So people really do, when change and develop their careers, and networks kind of grow and expand over time. And, you never know who's going to be doing what. So, maybe, as much as you can, sort of put good karma out into the universe. And, a lot of times it comes back in helpful ways. I'm researching this. Do you know anything? Can you tell me a little bit about this? Or, can you connect me to somebody else? Or, ended up getting jobs through people that I worked with. And, that tends to happen.
I feel like the combination of the word karma plus trust can take you long way in data. Be a good human and also build trust. And from there, it's just a question of time.
Yeah. I mean, in data, trust is such a foundation that, the data has to be accurate, it has to be trustworthy, it has to be vetted. And so that is really the most important thing you have within an organization.
Yeah, I feel like many people forget that, and they go for technology or run very fast with, buying them new fancy tool or whatever it is. And it all goes back to one time you have an incident or you did not, it's okay to have incidents as long as you explain to people why in the right time and not a week after, but like making sure that people are aware of the trust and the governance around the data and making sure you maintain that. It's not easy. It's really not easy, especially now with the world that evolving and everything needs to be fast. And now you cannot really
totally
deliver
agree.
slow.
I've had trust incidents or building trust after you have something that was not good. Is just being very transparent and say, this happened. This isn't what we wanted to happen. Here's what we're planning to do about it. Here's a whole bunch more technical detail if you care to know that detail. But please know that we know exactly the root cause and how to mitigate it. I found that goes a really long way. People really just, how are we mitigating it and how do we prevent it from happening in the future, and taking responsibility. Sometimes not followed in the world, but I found that the best way to build trust internally.
I agree. Can't agree more. You've been working with a lot of teams, both, historical teams where you were part of, and especially now you're seeing, I want to believe, ton of flavors of teams and leaders, and you've seen, I guess, turnaround of leaders with some companies you're working with, and as you shared, you advise many times or give them kind of like your view on things. And I'm wondering how, if you've seen kind of like the expectation from data teams evolve over time, over the years. I assume they are very different expectation than back at the time at Zynga or before, but obviously like everything changed, but it feels like it's accelerating a lot in the past few years, and the demand is way higher, and the load is way higher, and the expectation is do more with less people because AI can do everything for you. So I'm wondering, what do you feel about that, and have you seen kind of like the expectation evolve over time?
So expectations for data teams have changed over time, but in some ways they also haven't. So as data teams have existed for longer, people have more idea about what they do, what you can expect, where they fit, what kinds of outputs in terms of analytics, models, data products. At the same time, there's still often a sort of maybe like expectation of magic. And I think I've seen this in data, and I've seen it transform a bit into the AI world where, sort of what we really need is AI, and let's go, we really need is data because it's the buzzword. Let's go work really hard to recruit, a leader of this, a person, and bring them in, and then like, hooray, we have it. And then, okay, you're here. Like, what is it now?
What do we do now?
Part of my career arc has been starting data teams and being the first person or being an early person, and so there is quite a bit of even just educating people on here's the boundaries of this, and like, yes, it's great and magical, all these other things around it still need to happen in order for the company to be successful. So you can apply data to marketing, and we can tell you which marketing channels are more effective or less effective, and how many leads you're bringing in, and how they're progressing through the funnel. At the end of the day, a marketer still needs to plan a campaign, execute a campaign, take that insight on how well it performed, make some decisions about what's next. And so data should be a force multiplier. I think AI is maybe in a similar place that data was a decade ago in terms of being magic, but also not having a ton of understanding of what it can do. It's also still kind of early days in terms of what it can do and where it can be applied. And so I think, the most successful companies adopting AI think very carefully about what they're trying to accomplish, what value they're trying to drive for customers, and where AI has a kind of distinct advantage of speed or quality or price in terms of delivering that to customers. And the answer is likely, not everywhere, but some places. I think about this as something that data people will probably recognize is we've all built some kind of logic that's like an if-then statement. So, if it's this, like, just rename it to something else. And if it's that, just rename it to that. And it works well for a bit. And, a month or a year in, you end up with a 200-line case statement that becomes really brittle. So you end up with this kind of data in, like, brittle thing, and then you want data out. Like, what if you could put something else in there, like an LLM, to do some assessment of the input, make some decisions, and be adaptable to new values coming in, and then output the clean data, and go the rest of the way. And I think we'll find places where you put AI or LLMs in strategic points of a process. They help free up humans having to go look up things, or giant case if-then statements, make that go smoother, and then we'll win. It probably won't just be, kind of sprinkle it on top of your company, and all of a sudden it Super Mario like grows 3 times as thick as it was the day before.
I'm with you fully. A lot of thinking need to go into strategic thinking on what's the best ROI and where you can use it. And I think a lot of people are trying in multiple places, and only when you find the true ROI, which is where you can actually free people up to do other more important things, then I think we will nail it. But it's a lot of experimentation. Ask 2 more questions, but one question I want to ask is around good data team versus great data teams. There are a lot of smart people you worked with in the past. I'm sure you've been in good data teams, maybe even in bad ones, but for sure you've seen kind of like the magic of like a great data team in your career. What do you think is kind of like distinguishing or separate between the two?
I think the biggest thing that separates good data teams from great data teams, and to pick up an AI term, is context. We see that with prompting. Context is everything. It's the same with data teams. You can work on numbers all day long, but if they don't have that surrounding sort of story and information about how are they generated, how does that data come into the world, why did somebody collect it, what do they think it means, and then on the other side, what are we going to do with it? How is this going to help somebody make a decision or understand what's going on in the world in a way that they then take action to change it? You're just sort of pushing bits around. And so for me, it's always been really about why are we doing this? What is important? What outcomes will come from it? And so that ends up being kind of two-sided for data teams. One is the people on the data team. People who are really great at doing data are very curious and will go and ask the questions and find the people who know the answer or are collecting the data often in the first place and being able to work with them to sometimes collect it better or differently, or whether that's sort of humans typing in forms or it's instrumentation in your product so that you're getting all of the sort of data feed of what people are doing into your data store. So there's that. So the kind of the people that you hire and bring in and how the leaders continually give them context of what's happening in the business. And then the other part is, how does the business look at the data team? How are they structured and aligned with the rest of the business? Where do they report? Not necessarily single right answers, but the intention and the looking on the data team as a strategic resource that is there to superpower everybody else is definitely important in success. If the data team is sort of off in a corner and doesn't attend the meetings and doesn't talk to the people and doesn't know what's going on and why it matters, it's really hard to be successful in that kind of situation.
I can't agree with you more. I guess last question on my end. Many data leaders spending a lot of time talking about tooling. Constantly, every 4 or 5 years, we have a new buzz. If you had to design a stack today, and if people are looking at us, what is kind of like one underrated tool you insist on including, and then why?
What is an underrated tool in the data stack?
Yeah, that you insist in including, many people talk about tooling. What is something that you say, hey, this is like most likely the most important component and you would insist on, and why would you insist on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I tend to guide people to, there are certain things you need in a data stack. Like you need a data store to put the data in. You need to somehow get the data out of the sources and into that data store, which is the ETL world. And then you need something kind of on the front end to get that data into the hands of people who will use it. I've seen a lot of evolution in all of the elements of that data stack. I think that, I will say, and I know this is an interest area for you guys, is the
It's not about Matya. It's made just really, really intriguing.
I will say like the quality, we all know data quality is really important. And it's also always been an area that's hard to figure out how to invest in. So, I like the idea of having more visibility. I don't know any data person who hasn't spent many, many hours debugging a thing because somebody calls you and says, the numbers in the report are wrong. And the amount of hours of my life that I've spent going back through all the layers is a lot at this point.
I feel you. I've been the best one are the ones that are not afraid of doing it, right? Like the QA and doing the hard work, because it is hard work. Like it can be very intensive work to go through the process, especially that sometimes the stack or the layers are not fully just you, especially if you are in a team.
Yeah. I think, one thing that I've always found interesting, and it's interesting how the data stack is evolving, is the ability to go back through the whole chain all the way to the source to pinpoint what's going on. At some point, it's like I've got something in a dashboard, and I've got to find the person who wrote the code for the dashboard. Then I've got to figure out if that's not the problem. Then I go back to the SQL query, and if that's it's actually something that's not in the table, then I've got to go to the ETL tool and maybe the engineer that wrote the ETL code. And then if it's not there, I've got to go back to the source system. There's a lot to understand in that flow, and trying to think about. I wish there were ways to help us inspect all of that, and maybe AI will solve this for us, and this would be amazing. Say okay, well, actually, somebody changed the tracking in the product upstream, and therefore it has been flowing through the whole system incorrectly since last Wednesday. And I recommend this,
It
addition
needs
to
a
this.
lot of, you talked about context. It needs a lot of context
A
for
lot
that.
of context. Yeah. And then beyond that, I always recommend people take a look at the latest tools and then take a look at the team and the tools that they're familiar with, and probably pick a stack that you have some expertise in, if appropriate, or if the new thing has enough extra value, like go for that and then invest in the team learning that new tool. There's definitely an evolution, and there are tools available today that are much better and easier to use and easier to set up and maintain and offload a lot of the drudge work. And so that switchover is worthwhile, but sometimes there's a tool that's like gets the job done and people are familiar with it, and that's the right decision. And we're fortunate to live in a time of plenty where there's lots of really good tools out there. And so, picking the set of tools that really fits the needs of your team, it's sort of easier than ever, but maybe harder than ever because there's more choices.
I can't agree with you more. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. What will be the best way for people to reach out to you?
Probably the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm not super active on other socials, but I do check my LinkedIn fairly frequently.
Amazing. Cathy, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed the conversation, and looking to see you whenever I'm getting to the Bay Area or San Francisco area.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Crunching Data, brought to you by Mattia, the unified data ops platform. You can find us at mattia.io.